All right, my name is Jeff Anderson. To my left is Pat Wall. He is a former monk of St. John's and now an advocate working with us. To my right here is a very courageous survivor that has volunteered to come and speak his truth about his abuse and how he came forward. And he was abused by a monk at St. John's by the name of Robert Blumeyer, whose file, a part of which is being disclosed today. And also to his right is my esteemed co-counsel, Mike Bryant. We're here today for a number of reasons, but first is to praise and applaud the courage of the two survivors that filed suit today against St. John's and concerning a very serious serial predator by the name of Richard Eckroth. Eckroth has been known to us as a predator of many kids for many years, remains on restriction at St. John's, but this suit filed in Stearns County today is on behalf of two very courageous survivors abused by him in the 1970s. They are also two of what Eckroth referred to as the cabin kids. That means that he would bring kids that he knew from the parishes, from the school, from the clerical landscape to this cabin, where he would abuse them, where he would rape them, where he would violate them repeatedly. The numbers of names on this list alone of so-called cabin kids, which I'm not releasing, is over 360. And so these courageous survivors that filed this suit against the Abbey and St. John's, you can hold on to that, are really seeking to make sure that the past history concerning Eckroth and all the offenders are known so the past is not repeated in the future. And along with this suit today, we are also releasing the files of 5 monks who are offenders, whose files we now have gotten from the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, all of whom were assigned by the abbot in St. Paul in Minneapolis, and all of whom are known offenders. So these files that we're releasing, and they will be posted as soon as we're done today on our website, are right here. And they involve Robert Blumeyer, the offender that abused Lloyd Van Vliet, Tom Gillespie, another offender, Cosmos Dahlheimer, another well-known serial offender, Brendan Mayers, also a well-known serial offender, and Fran Hefkin, a well-known serial offender. But what isn't known is all of what is in these files of the Archdiocese, because they removed a lot of the pertinent stuff. And what really isn't known is the complete history known to St. John's. And so what these lawsuits do is seek to disgorge from St. John's the files and all the secrets of the crimes committed in the past. And the lawsuits then are brought in nuisance as well as negligence and assault. And what is known in this case is that each of these former abbots had some level of knowledge. Each of these former abbots had some level of notice, and each of these abbots made a choice to protect the clerical culture and these offenders and keep those files secret, and not to protect the kids. And so when it comes to prevention of sexual abuse, and when it comes to the protection of the kids, I call these Abbotts the bad Abbotts. The bad Abbotts. And it gives me no joy to use that descriptor when it comes to how they treated kids and the choices they made, the conscious choices they made. I'm going to turn it over for a moment to Lloyd Van Vliet. One of the offenders whose files we are releasing here today in part is Father Robert Blumeyer. He's obviously a monk at St. John's, and Lloyd shared this secret some years ago, came forward on his own, not with any help of ours, and he'll tell a little bit about how it was handled and why he's here today. And I want to say to you before you speak, Lloyd, how grateful we are for your courage in being here today and having done what you have for the right reasons. So why don't you step forward here and tell us what brings you with us today.
Hi, I'm Lloyd Van Vliet, and just to get closer, I got a call on Friday in 1997, I sobered up and I was going through my fourth and fifth step, and I wrote a letter, a 10-page letter to the Archdiocese, and I signed it to my new beginning, Lloyd. And I just left it alone from there until 2006, a turn of event. I became head maintenance guy at a Catholic church. How ironic, and the priest there, by this time I was sharing it, I'm out speaking at AA, and it can no longer haunt me anymore. So I have talked about it several times. And he suggested that I pursue this to the next level, and that's when I brought it up to the Archdiocese again and talked to them, and he put somebody, I can't remember the name of the person, a contact name, so I started pursuing this and going to therapy, and once again, then I went to St. John's, which is a very fearful place, because I really didn't believe I was going to leave that place alive, to tell you the truth. It was, because I seen these eyes of all these people there that they scared me. And so I was able to go through this, and they just signed here, write a check, and just, once again, that was the end of it, and they just swept that underneath the carpet too, and I never heard anything until this last Friday when I heard that this was happening, and I felt compelled, to be a part. If I could touch one person out there and let them know that it's okay to come forward and share, there's help, so that's why I'm here today. It's just so that one person may be helped from this.
And Lloyd, when you came forward first, did they have you keep that secret, and was that kept secret?
Yes.
Well, part of that file is no longer secret, and that is the file that we have now released, or caused to be released, at least in part, concerning Blumeyer. And we know this is only the file from the Archdiocese, but what we know is what this lawsuit seeks is to have the file in its entirety, the long history known to the abbot, to the former abbots and the abbey about Blumeyer's history. And while they swore you to secrecy, you obviously had the courage to come in here today and volunteer to share that. Thank you with us. On behalf of one of these survivors who've been identified as Doe 33, he asked that his identity be protected, as we always do, but he also really wants to see change. He wants to see change come from St. John's. He's deeply disturbed about the long history of secrecy and the concealment of crimes and the complicity of them by what I call the bad abbots when it comes to child protection. And he wrote a brief statement that Pat Wall is going to read. Pat Wall is a former monk, is a former priest at St. John's. He's now working as an advocate for us, and he may illuminate his history and knowledge about how this was handled. Before he does, why don't you read the statement of Doe 33, Pat?
Just a couple short paragraphs. For some time now, I have watched as the Catholic Church, my church, has continued to put more effort and focus into protecting its own interests instead of opening up their hearts and their minds and doing the right thing for victims that have been abused by Catholic priests. Something has to change. More of us need to come forward to create change and to change their procedures, their practices, and their policies. Maybe then and only then they will make changes at the top of this misguided leadership. And again, that's from John Doe 33, a survivor of Father Richard Eckroth. Richard Eckroth is a very formative person in the history of St. John's. He was the philosophy professor for the vast majority of priests trained at St. John's for almost 3 decades before they applied the geographic solution and sent him to the Bahamas to make him go away.
As a former monk and former priest, both at St. John's and having been assigned in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, what do you mean when you say they applied the geographic solution?
Well, they became aware that Richard Eckroth, as a perpetrator, they became aware of all of these guys as perpetrators, and then what they did is they moved them outside the jurisdiction so they can't be found, or more importantly, so that the scandal would not be heard of in those particular areas. A couple examples. Brennan Mayers, they know about him as he offends in the Diocese of St. Cloud, so they apply the geographic solution and send him to St. Bernard's and St. Paul. Cosmas, who also is a...
Cosmas Dahlheimer.
Cosmas Dahlheimer, very important person in the history of St. John's, master of novices. So that means all the beginners who entered St. John's Abbey for 25 years were trained by Cosmas. He's a perpetrator. What did they do? They decided he needed to be an associate pastor and moved him to St. Bernard's. Tom Gillespie offends in the Diocese of St. Cloud, so then they shift him on down both to St. Bernard's and, unfortunately, to St. Mary's in Stillwater.
And St. Mary's and a sister parish, St. Michael's, is a parish where you worked as a priest.
That was my last parish. I was the last Benedictine at St. Mary's in Stillwater. Fran Hefkin, you've heard this story before. He offends in the Diocese of St. Cloud at Cold Spring. He admits it to Chief Cons. And what do? They send him to treatment, and then they recycle him, geographic solution, back to what is now St. Elizabeth Ann Seton in Hastings. Father Robert Blumeyer, they find out about him in 1976. He's at St. Bart's, Wayzata, so then they move him down to St. Boniface in Hastings. They have multiple reports on Father Robert Blumeyer. They never, ever reported to authorities. They never told the public. They consistently moved him. They had reports in 76. They had reports because Lloyd's mom had the courage at that point then to go to Father Durand, and he was a pastor in Northfield at St. Dominic's at the time. He then writes a letter to Archbishop Roach. So now we have a conversation between Archbishop Roach and Abbot John Eidenschenk. At this point, as they're having this conversation, then the abbot confronts Robert Blumeyer. And the abbot doesn't believe Robert Blumeyer. So then Archbishop Roach and Abbot John Eidenshake concoct a plan. As long as it doesn't become public, we will keep him in ministry. And that's what they did. Robert Blumeyer died in 1983 without any of this ever being known. All of this continued on through all of these decades while all of this material is sitting in the files, not allowing the public to know about it. And even in 2006, St. John's was busy concocting agreements to make sure that none of this information ever came forward. And all of these monks were handled by these 4 abbots.
Mike Bryant, do you have anything to add to that?
No, well, I mean, the key is going to be getting these files directly from St. John's, directly from St. Cloud Diocese. I mean, this is just a start to it. As Jeff said, these documents, which you'll get a chance to see later on today, are heavily redacted. There's a lot of information here that has been held back. It's going to be getting these files, comparing them, carrying these files, looking at the history of letters that should have been disclosed years ago, the police should have known about, the authorities should have known about, and hopefully the authorities will still look into some of these files so that we'll see justice for not only the survivors that are out there, but for everybody, so that we can get this protection from the individuals, because at least 2 or 3 of them are still alive on that board alone.
So the good news is that because Judge Vandenorth ordered the release of all the Archdiocese files, these as well as hundreds of others are now being processed by us, and these partial files are now being released to you. They'll be posted at the end of this press conference on our website. The bad news is these are only partial files. The bad news is a lot of the material that should be made public is taken out of them, and we have a motion before Judge Vandenorth to compel them to not only turn over complete files, but turn over more than they already have. And the good news is that courageous survivors like these does, and courageous survivors like Lloyd, have the courage to stand up against the offenders and those that chose to protect them, and hold them accountable and do what's necessary to make the long and sordid and squalid histories reflected in these files known to the public. And until they are known, they're destined to be repeated. A couple of the things that are in those files that are, I think, worth noting is in the Blumeyer file, and I don't know if you've seen this yet, Lloyd, but it says that he was never removed from ministry, even after it became known that he had offended. He died in 1983, but his name was never released until when? 2013. So how many other Lloyds, how many other men and women suffer in silence, thinking they were the only ones violated by Blumeyer and these others? And that's why this nuisance action becomes so important, because all it seeks is an injunction, that is an order from the court in Stearns County demanding the release of these files, the same way they've been permitted to be released over here in Ramsey County by Judge Vandenorth. Another disturbing highlight in one of these files involves I think you referred to this, Pat, and this is involving Gillespie, right here. Gillespie was in Hastings and Stillwater before he was moved out, after he was moved out of the Abbey, and in various parishes. And in a memo to Archbishop Flynn, whose deposition I took last week, and we'll be releasing that here as soon as that can be. But last week we took Archbishop Flynn's deposition, and this is a memo from Kevin McDonough. And we took his deposition a few weeks ago. And he says, regarding both Dahlheimer and the Gillespie lawsuits, he says, normally common sense would dictate that we withhold the information from the public for at least two good reasons. And then he goes on to saying how they might be able to keep it secret. And if we look at this history of secrecy, and we look at the choices made by what I call, when it comes to child protection, the bad habits, and their strict adherence to secrecy, the maintenance of secret files, the refusal to disclose offenders, and the Abbey at St. John's first disclosed offenders in 2004 and their names, and under a settlement we made in 2004, made some disclosures. Then they took those names down after we made the settlement. And then they made another disclosure after we made another settlement in 2011, and another in 2013, but none of those names line up. And every time we force them to make a disclosure, they make a half-truth. And as far as we're concerned, until they come clean, it's a whole lie. And that's what they've been living. And that's what they do, because they choose to protect the offenders, the clerics, and their own reputation. And so it is a familiar refrain. It's a squalid history that we present, but it's a hopeful promise that we can now disclose and cause and use the courage of survivors like Lloyd and these survivors to file suit to cause a disclosure and exposure in a way there never has been, and then maybe someday there can be for these survivors some closure. So thank you, Lloyd. Thank you particularly for coming forward and joining us today. It's an extraordinary act of courage and service to your values.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Any questions?
Is it possible for Lloyd, if you could just possibly, Lloyd, explain kind of where you were, like, when you
Go for it.
how old you were, that kind of
It was in Wayzata at St. Bartholomew. You know, my mom was full-blooded Irish Catholic, so I mean, you didn't have much choice. You went to do these things, and so it was 69 to 1970 in that range. So I was around 14-ish, and you know, part of the grooming process was he had a stack of naked pictures of young boys. You know, and so I would go into the directory, and you know, my father was an active alcoholic, so I never had one, and I trusted this man, so he started taking me places, you know, taking me out to dinner, started doing things, and then as time went on, you know, he started bringing in other priests. There was 2 other priests that now I know I have pictures of them on my phone that were a part of the scheme that he was a part of. You know, I almost look at him as kind of a ringleader, you know, but this, and I found out later that my best friend actually came to me 7 years or 6 years ago and said that he was one. So it started in 1969 or 1970 that I started going to the directory, and he started showing me pictures and started, you know, from there.
Is it, I know this is going to be easy, can you explain exactly what he did or what the kinds of things he did to you or to other, and were there other victims there?
I don't know if there was any other victims. You know, I feel bad because I actually sent people to him as, you know, a confidant, you know, so in that sense I feel, you know, kind of a part of unknowingly. But the things that he did, you know, it was, you know, taking pictures was the beginning of it, you know. And he actually put me on a talk show, radio show. You know, he'd bring me to places that I'd never been before, you know, nice restaurants, and from there, you know, he started to perform oral and started, you know, exploring other areas of my body, and, you know, so that was soon to follow.
And you, Lloyd, at that time as a kid, couldn't share that secret with anybody and suffered pretty much in silence until you got straight and sober, right?
Yes. In
And
fact,
that's when you decided to share the secret and do something about it, and that's what leads you here 17 years later.
yeah. It stole my childhood. I mean, I quit doing everything I like to do. I quit playing baseball. I quit collecting. Everything I did changed. you know.
And because the Minnesota legislature passed a law last year that allows survivors to now bring an action, to force disclosure, to bring exposure, to seek accountability, there are other survivors out there whose names don't need to be used, who can come forward, just as John Doe 33 and 34 have done, and get help, get hope, get healing, and do something to protect other kids, just like Lloyd stands here with us today. So it's a new time, and it's a new day, and it's time for a new way. It's time for a new way for the Abbey and the abbots to come clean. It's time for the top officials in the archdiocese and all the dioceses in Minnesota to come clean. And it's sad that it's the survivors and the courage of the survivors that have to make them do it. But the good news is the legislature has now opened it up so they can. And that's all you got to know about that. Anything else?
Jeff, did you say that Lloyd's mother had made some sort of report?
I believe
Lloyd, come on in here.
I believe it was my mom. I'm not really sure exactly, but I know in 1976, because there's proof in front of me that somebody was aware of this. It wasn't me personally, but you know, by 1976, I was so far, you know, gone, removed from this planet, you know, into drugs that that if you remember the 70s, you weren't there, kind of a joke, and that's really hold true with me.
In the partial file that has been produced by the Archdiocese and Blumeyer, there's a report from a mother. We don't know if it's Lloyd's or not because the names are removed, and there's so many things taken out of this file that we don't know that yet. But we'll be back in front of Judge Vandernorth here on June 19th, demanding and ordering the Archdiocese to come forth with the rest of the information they have yet to. So we'll see. There's more to come, obviously.
And Lloyd, did you say that you had written a letter that you didn't initially send to the Archdiocese?
No, I actually sent it in 1997. I actually have it, that I got
See
a
that?
copy of it.
And how did they respond then?
I never heard back from them until 2006 when I got the job at the Catholic Church, and this priest, Father Mike, told me to pursue this and hooked me up with a Susan someone and a psychiatrist, and then the ball started to roll a little bit.
Lloyd, I want you to read this letter in your own hand, dated July 30th, 1997. In the first two sentences, I just want you to read what you wrote to the Archdiocese that you got no response from. Did you do that?
I'm writing this letter not knowing the outcome. I am uncertain and afraid, like I have been for so many years. I had an alcoholic father, and I think when I first met Father Roberts that I had found a father figure. He would listen to my problems and try to help. I trusted him. He would take me out to eat and around town to meet other people. One night he took me to a friend to do this radio station, and they put me on the air for a call to have parents call and ask me questions.
You don't have to read more, but when you say Father Roberts, you actually mean Father Robert there, don't you?
Yeah,
Because
Father
they went by the
Roberts.
first name.
Father Roberts.
That was
yeah.
Father Robert Blumeyer.
All priests go by the first name.
And this letter is quite detailed, and from it, no response was had by the Archdiocese.
Was there a particular person you addressed that to at the Archdiocese?
Kevin McDonough, I just remembered his name. He was the one that was contacted me in 2006 when this all started to unfold. But I didn't hear anything from 97 to 2006.
And not responding to reports or complaints like he made to Kevin McDonough in the Archdiocese is a long-standing pattern. It's a long-standing practice. And when they do respond, it's also been demonstrated in the other files and the history known to us, and even McDonough's own testimony that they basically, when they do respond, they choose to appease, and they choose to silence, and they choose to keep the survivors quiet so the statute of limitations can run. And in the file, I'll read in McDonough, from McDonough to Archbishop Roach in 1987. He writes, because of this, both Father Ward and I are convinced that the statutory provisions requiring the reporting of certain incidents do not apply to this case. So they make a conscious choice in 1997 to not report as mandated reporters, but they find a loophole, they think, and thus it's not reported. Thus he suffers, thus other kids suffer, and this is the kind of thing that continues to be demonstrated time and time again. Not just in these files, but in the volumes that have been released to us and will be released to the public as soon as we're able to.